بسم الله وكفى، والصلاة والسلام على من اصطفى. حضرة راعي المؤتمر سمو الشيخ صباح الخالد محمد الصباح رئيس مجلس الوزراء، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، حضرات السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إنه لمن دواعي سروري أن نتوجه إلى جمعكم الملتئم اليوم عبر التطبيق الافتراضي بمناسبة انعقاد مؤتمر التمكين المجتمعي للمرأة نماذج دولية وآفاق كويتية اليوم وغدا إن شاء الله، بتنظيم الاتحاد الكويتي للجمعيات النسائية الذي أتشرف برئاسته، والذي أنشئ بمبادرة من سمو الشيخ اللطيفة فهد السالم الصباح حفظها الله ورعاها عام 1994 للترابط في عمل الجمعيات النسائية وتقويته وإبرازه دوليا، وذلك قبل إنشائها لجنة شؤون المرأة، وهي الرائدة لمؤسسة العمل النسائي التنموي. وإذ نتطلع أن تساهم هذه التظاهرة الهامة بفضل محاورها الغنية والمتنوعة في بلورة الأجوبة المناسبة للإشكاليات الكبرى التي تعيق جهود التنمية وفق مقاربة قائمة على التجديد والإدماج، وذلك من منطلق إيماننا بأن تكريس مبدأ المساواة بين النساء والرجال هو السبيل القويم لتحقيق ازدهار ينعم الجميع بثماره. إن المبادرات الدولية والإقليمية والوطنية التي ما فتأت تواصل الخطى للحاق بركب القوى الصاعدة أضحت اليوم في أمس الحاجة إلى مبادرات مبتكرة ومحددة الأهداف ولجهود منسقة كفيلة بضمان الاستدامة لأثارها واعتماد مقاربة خلاقة تقوم على التجديد، وذلك عن طريق الأخذ بالبرامج الجدية لمؤسسات المجتمع المدني المعنية بتمكين المرأة، وخلق شراكات طويلة الأمد مع الدولة من أجل تحقيق رهان التنمية المرجوة، خصوصا وأن الكويت تعمل على تحقيق مخطط تنموي طموح وهو رؤية الكويت 2035، ويهدف من ضمن مبادئه تحقيق التمكين التام للمرأة عن طريق تنمية الموارد البشرية علميا وعمليا. ومن ثم فإن دولنا مدعوة اليوم في إطار مسيرتها التنموية إلى المضي قدما في استثمار كافة مؤهلاتها، خاصة رأس مالها اللامادي، وتثمين كفاءاتها لا سيما نسائها وفق شراكات فعلية مع المؤسسات المعنية من جهة، والشراكات الاستراتيجية مع الجمعيات النسائية العالمية من جهة أخرى. فعلى الرغم من التقدم الملموس الذي عرفته وضعية المرأة على المستوى الإقليمي والوطني، فلا بد من الإقرار بما ينتظرها من أشواط على هذا الدرب، وهو ما يتطلب مزيدا من الجهود من أجل تطوير المشاركة الفعلية الواسعة للنساء في مسارات التنمية وفي مواقع صنع القرار، ومن أجل استثمار إقبالهن الكبير على ريادة الأعمال. ولا شك أن القطاع الحكومي والقطاع الخاص والمجتمع المدني دورا حاسما يجب الاطلاع به في كافة الاتجاهات، بما يضمن تعزيز الدور الريادي للمرأة باعتبارها محركا للتنمية. إن هذا الاقتناع يقع في صلب خطة الأمم المتحدة للتنمية المستدامة لعام 2030، وفي مقدمة أهدافها 17 ذات الصلة، وعليه أدعو إلى تفعيل التدابير الاستثنائية حسب ما جاء في الفصل الرابع من اتفاقية القضاء على جميع أشكال التمييز ضد المرأة، وتوسيع نظام الكوتا وفق ما حددته مخرجات مؤتمر بكين بنسبة 31% كحد أدنى مطلوب من الحكومات لزيادة مشاركة المرأة في مراكز صنع القرار. والمطلوب من الحكومات مراجعة التأثير المقيد للنظام الانتخابي في التمثيل النسائي السياسي للمرأة في الهيئات، والنظر في تعديل هذا النظم. كما انتهت منظمة اليونسكو بعد مؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الرابع حول المرأة إلى سياسة واضحة في برنامجها من أجل تمكين المرأة في مجالات عديدة من الحياة أهمها التربية والتعليم والعمل، وذلك حتى يتعود الوعي المجتمعي على أهمية دور المرأة في الحياة السياسية ومسالك صنع القرار. لنا يقين فإن لقاءكم اليوم سيمكن من التداول العميق والتشاور البناء بفضل ما تتوفرون عليه من حوارات مشهود بها وما ركمتموه من ممارسات مثلى وتجارب ناجحة بشأن مختلف القضايا التي تهم تمكين المرأة، وإذ نتطلع لأن تساهم المقترحات والتوصيات التي ستسفر عنها مناقشاتكم في تعزيز مسار ترسيخ المكتسبات، ما يمكن من وضع المسار على الطريق القويم والتقدم والتضامن، اعتمادا على الإسهامات القيمة لكافة نسائها. وإذ نجدد الترحيب بكم في هذا المؤتمر الافتراضي، فإن نسأل العلي القدير أن يسدد خطاكم ويكلل بالنجاح هذه الجهود. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيدة الفاضلة رئيس الاتحاد الكويتي للجمعيات النسائية الشيخة فادية الصباح، السادة الحضور والسيدات، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني في هذا اليوم أن ألتقي بكم وأن أتحدث عن هذا المؤتمر، والذي سوف نكون ونشارك فيه جميعا خلال اليومين القادمين، اليوم والغد. بلا شك أن قضية تمكين المرأة هي قضية دولية يسعى الجميع إلى تفعيلها. المرأة وتقدمها وتمكينها أصبح مؤشر مهم من مؤشرات التنمية والتحولات الديمقراطية التي تسعى إليها جاهدة الدول العربية والدول الخليجية. لذلك طبعا بلا شك لم يكن من المستغرب أن تقوم الأمم المتحدة هذا العام باختيار عنوان المرأة والقيادة في مواجهة كوفيد-19، والذي كان عنوانا مهما لليوم العالمي للمرأة الذي احتفى به جميعا. كما لا يفوتني حقيقة أن أتحدث وأن أشير إلى القيادات النسائية خلال هذه الأزمة في إدارة هذه الجائحة، وكانت هناك نماذج رائعة رأيناها، بل أن هناك دراسات حقيقة بدأت تتحدث عن هذه القيادة وعلاقتها بالمرأة، وكيف المرأة كانت حاسمة في اتخاذ الإجراءات الاحترازية منذ الأيام الأولى. وبالتالي رأينا أن هذه الدول كانت الأقدر في حقيقة مواجهة تلك الجائحة، وعلى سبيل المثال منها ألمانيا ونيوزيلند، تايوان، فنلند، حقيقة عدد من الدول التي كنا نتابع إجراءاتهم وقدرتهم على مواجهة هذه الجائحة. كل ذلك حقيقة يجعلنا نؤكد على أهمية هذا المؤتمر وأهمية هذا العنوان. ولذلك طبعا انطلقنا من هذه الرؤية المقارنة، والتي سوف تكون هي المنهاجية التي اعتمدها هذا المؤتمر، والذي سوف تكرس الجلسة الأولى حقيقة للاطلاع على التجارب الدولية. فحينما نسعى لأن ننهض مجددا بمسيرة المرأة الكويتية، ولا سيما أن المرأة الكويتية حققت العديد من الإنجازات. المرأة الكويتية كانت من أوائل النساء في المنطقة الخليج وكذلك المنطقة العربية في سعيها لتحصيلها العلمي، من أوائل السيدات في المنطقة التي تبوأن مناصب عديدة كرئيس تحرير جريدة يومية، رئيسة جامعة، في السلك الدبلوماسي، ومن ثم طبعا دخولها في المشاركة السياسية على السلطتين التشريعية والتنفيذية. وفي عام 2020 حقيقة يعتبر يوما مميزا أو سنة مميزة للمرأة الكويتية، خصوصا أن في هذا العام اكتملت الحقوق كجانب إجرائي مع دخول المرأة السلك القضائي في الكويت، وبذلك وجود المرأة الكويتية الآن أصبح موجود في كافة السلطات التشريعية والتنفيذية والقضائية. ولكن لا تزال هناك معوقات، لا تزال هناك تحديات، والتي من خلال هذه الجلسات وهذا النقاش نحاول حقيقة أن نتبادل التجارب، ومن أجل أن نضع خارطة طريق مستقبلية نستطيع أن نسير من خلالها بشكل أفضل وبشبكة وتعاون مع الجمعيات النسائية داخل الكويت وخارج الكويت. لذلك الجلسة الأولى ستكون جلسة دولية يشارك فيها عدد من الخبراء الدوليين، والتي أيضا سوف تعتمد على ما تم إنجازه خلال السنوات الخمس الماضية وما سوف ينجز خلال الخمس سنوات القادمة، خصوصا في ظل قرار الأمم المتحدة بالتطور النوعي وخطة التنمية المستدامة SDGs. كما تعنى الجلسة الأولى حول استشراف الخطط المستقبلية للأمم المتحدة لتشجيع الأسرة الدولية على دعم الجهود التنموية المتعلقة بتمكين المرأة، وتركز الجلسة على الأبعاد التنفيذية المتعلقة بالخطط الاستراتيجية. هذه الجلسة سوف تسعى للإجابة على عدد من الأسئلة: ما هي التوجهات الدولية الخاصة بتمكين المرأة والتي تمت خلال الخمس سنوات السابقة وما الذي تمخض عنها؟ كيف بالإمكان وضع التجربة العربية والكويتية في الإطار المقارن مع بقية التجارب الدولية المتعلقة بأدبيات تمكين المرأة، وذلك لرسم وصياغة الخطط الاستراتيجية الوطنية التي تفعل دور المرأة في المجال التنموي؟ ما هي الآفاق المستقبلية وفقا لقرار الأمم المتحدة بالتطور النوعي وخطة التنمية المستدامة العالمية؟ وما هي أبرز الملامح الدولية في استراتيجيات دعم المرأة في الخطط المستقبلية؟ هذه الجلسة التي سوف يشارك فيها خبراء دوليين من عدة منظمات دولية تسعى لتمكين المرأة، والتي سوف تكون لهذا اليوم. في اليوم الغد إن شاء الله ستكون هناك جلستين. الجلسة الأولى ستخصص للتجربة العربية، وكما نعلم بأن هناك تفاوت في التجارب العربية في تمكين المرأة، وبذلك تسعى هذه الجلسة لتسليط الضوء بداية على تلك التجارب في الإطار المقارن في داخل المنظومة العربية، ومن ثم تنطلق للتركيز على عدد من الدول، لا سيما كل من التجربة المصرية والأردنية واللبنانية والمغربية. وفي إطار ذلك تسعى هذه الجلسة لمعرفة أيضا ما تم تحقيقه خلال الخمس سنوات الماضية وما سيتحقق خلال الخمس سنوات القادمة. وبذلك هذه الجلسة أيضا تحاول الإجابة على عدد من الأسئلة، بما فيها: ما هي خصوصية التجربة العربية لكل دولة؟ ما هي أبرز ما حققته المرأة في إطار المكتسبات التنموية؟ وما هي أبرز التحديات التي واجهت ولا تزال تواجه خطط تمكين المرأة العربية؟ وكيف بالإمكان الاستفادة منها في التجربة الكويتية؟ بعد ذلك ننطلق إلى التجربة الأخيرة والجلسة الأخيرة، والتي سوف تخصص للكويت، وبلا شك كل شركائنا في هذا المؤتمر وكل المتحدثين سواء الخبراء الدوليين والجلسة العربية، ومن ثم طبعا الجلسة الكويتية والتي سيتحدث فيها عدد من الشخصيات الكويتية المتميزة والتي لديها بصمة في العمل المجتمعي والعمل النسائي، بمشاركة أيضا من مجلس الأمة. فلذلك طبعا هذه الجلسة سوف تصب فيها حقيقة كل ما سوف يقال في الجلسات السابقة في محاولة لوضع خطة مستقبلية لتمكين المرأة. حقيقة أود أن أشيد إلى جزئية مهمة. الاتحاد الكويتي للجمعيات النسائية يؤمن إيمان قاطع بأن تمكين المرأة يكون من خلال الشراكة، ولذلك هذا المؤتمر السادة الأفاضل وزملائنا الأعزاء هو حقيقة يشكل نموذج رائع من الشراكة. هذه الشراكة سواء برعاية سمو رئيس مجلس الوزراء الشيخ صباح الخالد، ووجود أيضا مشاركة نائب وزير الخارجية لشؤون حقوق الإنسان سعادة السفير طلال المطيري، والذي سوف يترأس الجلسة النهائية. هذه الشراكة تأتي من الحكومة، وهناك أيضا في الجلسة الكويتية سيشارك رئيس لجنة المرأة في مجلس الأمة، وبالتالي تتحقق حقيقة شراكتنا أيضا مع السلطة التشريعية ممثلة في البرلمان ومجلس الأمة الكويتي. وبالإضافة إلى شركائنا من الجمعيات النفع العام. أيضا هناك شراكاتنا الدولية سواء على المستوى الخليجي، المستوى العربي والمستوى الدولي. كل هذه الشراكات وكل هؤلاء الفاعلين حقيقة وجودهم مهم جدا إذا نحن نرغب بوضع استراتيجية شاملة وكاملة للمرأة الكويتية، ويعني خطة تستطيع من خلالها أن نسعى أن نخرج من إطار المشاركة إلى التمكين. المرأة الكويتية حققت المشاركة نعم، ولكن إلى الآن في طريقها إلى التمكين. لن يتحقق هذا التمكين إلا بكل هذه المشاركات، سواء كانت المشاركات الحكومية والمشاركات الNGOs وجمعيات النفع العام، وأيضا الأسرة الدولية والنتوركينج، ويعني خصوصا الشبكات الداخلية والخارجية للمرأة. باعتقادي أن كل هذه الأيادي الهامة ستصب لمصلحة المرأة، وكما نعلم أن المرأة تعتبر عنصر رئيسي في السياسة الكويتية. السياسة الكويتية سياسة قائمة على التنمية البشرية وتنمية الفرد، وكما نعلم حينما نتحدث عن تنمية الإنسان هو المرأة والرجل. والكويت حقيقة بلد منذ التأسيس ما قبل البترول وما بعد البترول لم يقم إلا من خلال شراكة حقيقية قامت بين الرجل والمرأة. شاكرة لكم حسن الاستماع، وشاكرة لكم حضوركم معنا اليوم في هذه الجلسة الافتتاحية وفي هذا المؤتمر، وإن شاء الله نبدأ بعد قليل جلساتنا الأولى مع الجلسة الدولية. شكرا جزيلا. First, I would like to welcome all our guest speakers in this panel. I will give a small background for the goal of this conference that was planned almost 2 years ago and supposed to be held actually in Kuwait, but it was postponed due to the current global crisis. That the Kuwaiti Union for Women NGOs anticipated the need for Kuwaiti women to be empowered by this kind of women networking inside and outside Kuwait. Therefore, the anticipation turned to be true after the latest results for the parliament election, where women lost their only remaining seats. I believe anticipation and working before the crisis happened, it is form of women empowerment. Today, your presence, participation, and your willing to exchange your thoughts in global women empowerment, it is a great form of women empowerment. Therefore, our opening session today is just going to be remarkable. It includes fascinating women leaders from different backgrounds, professions. Each brings to the table a unique skill sets and experiences. Please welcome our 4 guest speakers. The first speaker, we will be listening to a recorded message from Mrs. Susan Kahika, Kenyan Senator and the President of the IPU Bureau of Women Parliamentarians, Dr. Wibke Koing, GIZ, Head of the Global Leadership Academy, and Dr. Vegeta Iyango, CIO, USA Education Development and Diplomacy Organization, Dr. Fatma Batul Sayan, AK Party Deputy Chairwoman and member of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, Mrs. Kathy Allen, President, owner of the Connections Group. Hello, Professor Wibke, can you start now, please?
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. And everybody else still as well?
Yes, I think so.
No, we have the other way around. Okay, thank you very much. Then let me start again. So it's a great honor to be part of this conference. Thank you very much again for the invitation that I had already for a long time to be present in Kuwait, which I would have loved to do last year, and as all of us, and then the pandemic stroke. So we visit each other in our living rooms or salons from Heidelberg. And as Haida already introduced me, for the past 10 years. And it is a program commissioned by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and sort of implemented in the framework of the German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ. This program, Global Leadership Academy, has for the past, I have to count now, yes, not 9 years, now implemented 16 international dialogues on topics of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are very broad topics like sustainable oceans, like memory, for example, how do societies with a traumatic past, may it be military dictatorship or genocide, fruitful presence and future for coming generations, so they have this very bad history. And also dialogues on innovative city planning, dialogues on artificial intelligence, obviously. So you see it's very broad. One of these dialogues was on gender questions in leadership, and that was the context how I met Harry and also Ligita Yango, who's going to speak after me. And so you see it's not one-time dialogues, the design we do, but a very strong stress is also on building a community, so to connect people with each other. I think that is also a topic that we share today and tomorrow in this conference. So it's not just other workshops, but we know that the SDGs and obviously COVID as well showed us that the challenges that we face on the planet are so big that one conference or one institution or one nation state is not going to have the solution. But we will have to have new forms of cooperation and think in very long spans of time to bring about change. So that is the context in which I work. So in my presentation and my contribution to this conference, I would like to make in this context, some small points in the beginning. 3 different points, in fact. Because I think the Sustainable Development Goals, they are a very big sort of a topic, or they just draw together what we are asked to. They, first of all, show us that the complexity of the challenges. So even the Millennium Development Goals before are national programs that many of our nations have for development or for change, obviously, and had for ages. Germany as well as Kuwait or the US or Turkey or Kenya or other countries. They work with the idea of that Kuwait's future is only Kuwait's future, or Germany's future is it's only Germany's future. But we are all interconnected. So obviously Germany can't think about its future without Europe and not without the globe.
لا هو مؤتمر فلازم يكون في ترجمة فأنا قاعدة.
So we understood that on the national level, but I think that also so that more inclusion. So we have to include more perspectives in looking.
لا ما راح يتأخر، راح أكتب المدير شوية.
So under this topic of inclusion, I would like to make 3 points, a little bit in line with the title of the program and the experience I have. So the Global Leadership Academy, look first at the global. So I think, and that is our experience, that global approaches are very important. Global or regional, and you can't always think global, but regional. To see context, to see different perspectives. Let me give you a practical example. It means inclusion if I look to regions. For example, we started one dialogue on migration. So if you discuss questions of migration, you have to look at least at 3 different types of countries. The countries of origin of a migrant, and then the countries of transition, because migrants travel through countries in many cases, or regions if it is internal migration within one country, which is most of the migration on the planet. And then there is a region or a country of final destination. So it's 3 different areas that have to be taken into account. What happens to them? What happens to the countries of origin if young people leave? What happens to all these transition regions of countries that people travel through? And what happens to the societies and the countries where people arrive? So if you discuss questions of migration, all three geographies should have a say, should sort of be in the discussion and the dialogue about that. So that is the global, the regional inclusion aspect. Then leadership. What do we mean with leadership? With leadership, my understanding is not that the CEOs of the world should unite and decide what to do. It is more about an attitude of leadership. So what I always say, and which might be shocking for some of you, is that a cleaning lady and a chauffeur can do their job with an attitude of leadership, meaning to take responsibility what they do, to try and do the very best in the position they are. And it is this attitude to take responsibility, to take leadership, what is my task, that we want to cultivate in people, or sometimes awaken in people again. So there can be political or economical leaders who are a CEO or a leader on their name card, but who don't have an attitude of a leader. So there can be a cleaning lady in the same building who has the attitude of a leader, though she doesn't even have a name card, maybe she can't even write. Yeah? So that is the understanding of leadership, to take responsibility for the task you do. So leadership is to be understood in an inclusive way, societal, so not different strata, not only people with a university degree are leaders or something, but it's the attitude, and also inclusive, obviously, gender-wise. It's not only, well, or how we always say, elderly, grey-haired men, but it can be young bloggers who have a blog or an Instagram account who are leaders and identification figures for a huge amount of young people. And it could be elderly senators, male senators with grey hair as well. So that is the concept of leadership, responsibility. And obviously not only sort of men or only women, but sort of broader gender aspects. And then the last point, the third point, the academy part, the Global Leadership Academy. Academy doesn't mean that you do a course and then you get a certificate and then you're a certified leader or a better person or something. But it means that also we have to be inclusive from a professional aspect. So the NGOs won't find a solution. The politicians won't find a solution. The economic leaders won't find a solution, or the academics won't write the research paper that finds the solution. We see that very, very practically in COVID now, I think, that there can be excellent cooperation on the medical side, but that we also have to take into account the societal aspect of
sort of a change on the labor markets. There will be different or less jobs after we sort of overcome, hopefully one day, the pandemic. And then the question will be again in countries who gets these jobs, men or women, old experienced people or youngsters who have not even entered the labor market before. So all these questions we as a human race will have to solve in the coming years, no matter if they find, if there's enough vaccine or not. So it's that kind of inclusion, yeah, all walks of life. So what I would ask for is that talking in the conference of the Kuwaiti Women's Association, that women of all regions, backgrounds and professions should unite for that. Because it can be, and that is from our experience, that from people what happens in our dialogues, and Vijita and Haila are people who can talk much better about that because they experienced it. I only organized them. But people you normally don't meet, like all the people who are today and tomorrow not in this conference, they might actually bring you to an enlightenment or give you the idea for the solution for your personal questions. That could be. So what we do in the Global Leadership Academy, my team and me, we actually understand us as architects for spaces, and I think this, what you did today and tomorrow, is such a space. Architects for spaces where something can happen, as catalysts to start discussions, and in a way as gardeners to foster the seedlings of ideas or dialogues who start in these spaces, but nothing more, because what really happens then is sort of the task of the people who participate in it. So the change is brought about, the development is brought about by the participants, not by the organizers, no matter how highly achieved or skilled they are. Because, as I said in the beginning, change will need a group of people. So to sum up, I think we need a mind shift on a global scale. We need a mind shift to more inclusion, to inclusion beyond borders, may they be national, political, religious, social. And I think COVID again has shown us that this is needed. And we are suddenly, I'm very proud of us as humans, because we are suddenly able to do steps that we couldn't do before, astonishingly. So we need this. And also, obviously, go beyond gender borders if somebody still has that in his head or her head. So include, don't ask, is that a young woman, or is that an old man, or is that a youngster who has no degree, or is that somebody who has 3 professorships? It doesn't really matter in some aspects. Go beyond this. And so that is, I think, what I ask for, inclusion. And have a mindset to think about in your daily work, like, do I really take all perspectives into account? That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to talk to every perspective. And it can be very hard, obviously, because in the long run, it also includes the people who don't agree with you. Like people who would find this sort of the conference we have today and tomorrow horrible. They think, no, this shouldn't be enhanced. I mean, women, NGOs in Kuwait, why? We don't need them. Even those should be included in such a thinking of inclusive sort of approach. And they won't join us, obviously, today and tomorrow in the conference. But if we don't take their perspective into account, we act as if they are not existing, and that is wrong. They are existing. There are also people existing we don't agree to. So if we think about the challenges and solutions, we also have to take into account people who have opposite perspectives, because we will have to work with them out there every day in our life. So that is the hard part. So let me finish with a saying that I don't know. I heard it many years ago, and I don't know where it comes from ancient Egypt or the African continent or Mesopotamia or whatever, but I like it. So it's a saying that goes this way. If you want to travel fast, travel alone. But if you want to travel far, you have to travel together. And I think that is what COVID tells us, that we will have in the sort of for the benefit of humankind and future generations. And I talk to you as a mother of 3 wonderful children. We will have to travel far. And that is why I ask for more inclusion and more international cooperation to try and solve the challenges that we face out there, as men and women all together. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm looking forward to the discussion part later on. Thank you.
Dr. Vijita is our next speaker. Dr. Vijita Ayango, she's a COO, USA Education, Development and Diplomacy Organization. Please.
Hela, can I go ahead?
Yes.
I think
yes.
You can me, right? Yeah, great. Okay. Well, good afternoon to everyone. I'm talking to you from California, so it's a bit early for me. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning, but it's great to be here with you. I wish I was there in person. It was to be like that last year. Maybe next year you're going to have to get us all together in the same place, Hela. So, yes, it's nice to be connected with all of you. I often know, as Hela said, we all know each other through thanks to the Leadership Academy, and we have stayed connected for 5 years, 6 years, following that network. And I know that there are other speakers following me, and I wanted to just say that my presentation changed, of course, because of COVID. So my proposal was to really talk about some of the issues I feel that we should look at from a perspective of this current COVID context. So I wanted to share my screen, but I don't think it's been disabled. Hayla, I sent the presentation to Siam. Is this something that you can share on your side? Or can you enable my screen? If she could enable my screen, I can share it. And if not, I'm just going to forget about my presentation and speak from it. Just let me know.
Okay.
I just don't want to waste everyone's time because...
Yeah, you can proceed, Dr. Jita.
Okay, so I'll just...
wait for Siham to fix the...
humanitarian crisis globally. I worked in Afghanistan, Iraq, during the tsunami, during the earthquakes. And I've seen, as a gender advisor, senior gender advisor, I have seen the reality of the impact of some of these crises on women and girls. I see that it's up on the screen. Can you go to the second slide already? Yeah. Yeah, the second slide, please. The next one. Okay. Siam, if you could just go to the next slide and just put it on full screen. Okay, let me just continue and then the slides will catch up with being a gender advisor and being also someone who's worked in development for about 25 years, and I've worked on the policy side and the program side. This crisis, I was actually in West Africa when the COVID crisis started, and I have gone back twice. I'll be traveling back again on Wednesday, and it's a very different kind of crisis. Past crises, when it talked about women, whether you talk about, displacement, domestic violence, early marriage. Yes, we saw all of that. But now we are looking at a completely different crisis that we don't really know the magnitude. So it's very difficult to talk about what is the gender dimension of the crisis yet. We know that there's been a recession, global recession. The world is flat. It's no longer north, south, west, and east. It's all flat. Men are doing work at home with women. Yes, women have increased burdens, but men have very different roles. We have a major issue of mental health globally. You're talking about kids from the ages of very young to elderly people. There's a very big issue of mental health. And we're talking about also lots of innovations, retooling and pivoting, where new kinds of programs are being started and initiatives within this very, very complex context. Now, what does one, if you're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, or any development goals, global development goals, how does one design any policy or program? How do you start? You cannot start unless you have credible, current data. And we don't yet have that. If you just look at the World Bank's gender dimension of the COVID pandemic, you'll see that I'm on slide 5, you're still on slide 2, I'm on slide 5. If you look at the gender dimensions of the COVID pandemic from 2020, the report, it talks about women can be affected, may be affected. A lot of speculation about the impact of COVID on women. Next slide, please. If you look at the spotlight on gender, COVID-19 and the SDGs written by UNIFEM, the next slide, please. You'll see that the May 20 data talks about more women have died from COVID than men. But if you look at the April 2021 data, for every 10 women who have died, there are 15 men who have died. So even the data has changed. So you can't use last year's UN Women or Women's report and talk about what is the problem. If the SDGs are going to be rethought, you're going to have to talk about current and real data. Next slide, please. If you look right now, which countries, because very often when you talk about gender, we start with disaggregated data. If you look at the red, those are all the countries that do not report sex disaggregated data. within this crisis. There are quite a few countries that are in the red. So you can't really start talking about what measures are we going to take without having the data. Next slide, please. There's the 2020 Social Progress Index. They always try to measure progress using about 50 income indicators and outcome indicators from 163 countries. Next slide, please. It says basically, if the current trends continue, the world won't achieve the Sustainable Development Goals until 2082. And that's just, again, I still consider this speculation because we don't know where we are right now. And we don't know what kind of innovations are possible, what innovations are taking place. Next slide, please. The March 2021 Global Gender Gap Report and the World Economic Forum discussions predicts that it will now take 135 years to reach gender equity. I don't know, or gender equality. I don't know where that came from. I know it's based on a lot of analysis and research, but if this had been a year ago, I might have used this as substantial information, but we don't know. Next slide, please. So I'm going back to the questions that we were asked for this particular session. What are the international trends related to women's empowerment over the last 5 years? Yes, we know more women are in power, and I think in the third session on Kuwait, we'll hear more about Kuwaiti women who are now in ministry roles and in the Arab world and globally. We're seeing many more women in power and decision making. We are also seeing a lot more women owning and controlling assets and heading organizations. Second question, how is it possible to place the Arab and Kuwaiti experience? And my point here is that there has to be a pivot. The agenda and the next steps need to be reframed. Next slide, please. The solution is moving towards, to me, I always have used frameworks. The solution is moving towards a framework for action. You know, what are the future prospects in terms of qualitative development and global sustainable development for the next 10 years, starting 2021? My point is that it's an open field. We cannot go with the past measures. Kuwait can be a front runner in creating a framework leading to a collective Arab agenda for women. And we have to also assess the impact on Kuwait and the region, design and drive solutions for the UN and other international organizations to consider. It's no longer, you cannot start with a global agenda. You need to start actually with a local agenda. And the union and the group that organized this conference has an opportunity to initiate that. And I'm going now back to the point, the conference title, social empowerment. Social empowerment can be looked at in 4 different levels. The next slide, please. The individual, the family, the community, and at the social policy level, where we look at local, national, regional, and global actions. It goes back to what Vipki was saying about inclusion. That's where social policy is. And in this instance, women have also got to be enablers. Women can be in positions of power, but they do not have to be only creating policies for women and girls. They can be creating policies for women, girls, men, and boys. And that's the beauty of working in the gender environment. I personally, right now, I'm working only with a group, with youth in prisons. And they're women and men, but they're the most vulnerable youth within this crisis I have seen. And that's where my focus has been since last December, and in my professional pursuits. So this is my last slide. And it is really, when I was with the US government, we had this thing called Build Back Better. And we had the opportunity with the COVID crisis to build back better. And whenever I think of frameworks, I go back to, if you're talking about a 2021 framework for action, and I'm just talking about something that I will challenge the union to think about, where you take a look within Kuwait at the individual, the family, the community, and social policy levels. while you're doing this, you're assessing what is the real impact of COVID in Kuwait on women, on men, where are the areas with others in the region. You can come up with an agenda that can frame the SDGs and really help to drive the agenda through to 2030. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time. And thank you again to the host.
Thank you, Professor Najita Yango for this remarkable. And the key measures for women empowerment that includes international cooperation, architects, spaces, inclusion. Professor Yango was also very positive towards the role that Kuwait could play in the future, as she mentioned that Kuwait could be a front runner in women empowerment by implementing the measures that she mentioned through the different circles that include the family, the community, the social dimension, and the individual level. Thank you again. And now we will move to our next speaker. And at the end of the session, we will open for our audience, to present their questions and their comments. Our next speaker is Dr. Fatma Bitul Sayan, aka Party Deputy Chairwoman and member of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey.
Good afternoon from Turkey. Can you hear me? Okay. I'd like to begin by Sheikh Abdullah El-Sabah, President of Kuwaiti Union of Women Association, and all her team who contributed to this work, and all the panel attendees, and also special thanks to Dr. Hayla, our moderator. The past year, under the influence of the pandemic, has really hardened our work. The pioneering role of women in combating the threat is very, very important, and as well as the heavy burden they bear in the fight. Everywhere around the world, and also in Turkey, women have been at the forefront of the battle against the pandemic with their devoted efforts, especially in the health sector. We all thank the women who worked in the forefront in the health sector. With this understanding, as it has done so during the pandemic, Turkey continues to pursue effective policies to empower women in every aspect of life and to put also an end to one of the biggest human rights violations, violence against women. In the post-COVID-19 world, we are also putting special effort to combat, to empower women also. Aimed at drawing attention to the effect of the pandemic on women's rights and the endeavors for empowering women and realizing equal rights. In this context, Turkey has helped launch the Women 20 initiative during its G20 presidency and led the efforts for the establishment of the Women's Advisory Council under the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation. Turkey is also one of the founding members of the Group of Friends for the Elimination of Violence Against Women under the UN, and also among the earliest supporters of the resolutions on the efforts of COVID-19 on women, adopted pursuant to the call of the UN Secretary General. Indeed, these initiatives and resolutions are only a few examples of the many steps taken by Turkey in this regard. The strong role of women in our society and culture is also reflected in the professional life, and women obtain more leadership positions in every sector. In the case, women's empowerment has faced a turning point in Turkey. Empowering women in all areas of society, achieving equal among my country's main objectives. We support greater representation of women in the decision-making mechanisms, as well as education, employment, business, arts, social projects. Turkey has a human-oriented approach when it comes to empowering women and helping them achieve equality within all parts of the society. My government has adopted multiple pieces of legislation aimed at protecting women from domestic violence and also eradicating gender-based discrimination. And there is a very strong legislative structure in this. I'm proud to say that my government has put into practice laws, regulations that make Turkish women stronger and stronger every day. Women's participation in social, economic, and political life is now easier, and Turkish women can now work as bankers, teachers, lawyers, engineers, and we are encouraging numerous number of women to work also as politicians. Let me highlight some dimensions in this aspect. 49.8% of Turkey's total population is women. Over the last 19 years, the female labor force participation rate increased from 28% to 38%, and the female employment rate increased from 21% to 30%, which is a great increment. We aim at strengthening the economic status of women so that by the end of 2023, the female labor force participation rate employment rate will be 34%, employed will be nearly 20%, and the proportion of women in employers will be 10%. A number of projects are put into practice by various ministries in order to achieve economic empowerment of women. Projects such as Mom's Job, My Future, which aims at reducing the burden of childcare on women through establishing creches in organized industrial zones, thus increasing women's employment in industry. Engineer Girls of Turkey, which provides supports in all spheres of female students who want to be engineers, thus increasing the number of women engineers, provide incentives for women to take an active role in economy. The number of women in decision-making roles in Turkey increased as well, with women now making up to 17%, nearly 18% of the Turkish parliament, while over 50% of the staff employed in universities are women. These are the professors, academicians. Also, as a good example, the foreign ministry stands out as one of the ministries where women are all very well represented. The rate of women working in the ministry has reached 37% as of this year. Women constitute 25% of the ambassadors in the ministry. In addition to our efforts to promote the compulsory education of girls, we take measures to remove the obstacles faced by women in higher education and also academia, and to put women's lives and experiences at the center of the academic studies. In line with our human-based approach, we provide more opportunities to not only Turkish women, but also to all female guests who take shelter in Turkey. Turkey has opened its doors for Syrians, Syrian refugees without any form of discrimination since 2011. More than 4 million Syrian refugees are granted temporary protection in Turkey. In order to raise awareness about gender-based violence among the Syrians who fled civil war in their country, to prevent violence against Syrian women and children, and also to strengthen the capacity of service providers, we conducted programs in coordination with UN. I find Turkey's human-oriented approach very important, as the coronavirus pandemic has evidently worsened many global inequalities. This could increase as more vulnerable parts of societies across the world face less access to a vaccine. As our President Erdogan keeps emphasizing, COVID-19 vaccine should be universally available regardless of where it is produced. And this is a very, very important point that I want to highlight. And let me conclude my underline Turkey's vision for the future. The key subject in our dream of a world with virtue and high morality is women. We regard women as the entities of paramount importance who will bring family and society to the future. And we form our endeavors in this manner. We think that women is the center of the society. So we find the elimination of all kinds of discrimination against women and ensuring their empowerment in every sphere of life is very fundamental principle. As the government, we continue to take both transformative and sustainable steps concerning strengthening of women's social status. We will be taking firm steps by acting together as women, men, youth, and elderly. We consider ensuring a proper social dialogue among all institutional elements of our social structure as the essential component of this field of responsibility. Our basic responsibility to our future generations is realizing social gender justice by adopting this principle approach. And my presentation is all this. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon from Turkey, from Istanbul.
Thank you, Batul Sayar, AK Party Deputy Chairwoman and member of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, presenting the experience of Turkish women, especially in women empowerment. As a matter of fact, Turkey as a case study is very important for us, especially for women from the Gulf and Arab women, due to the fact that there are a lot of similarities between Turkish society and the Arab societies, especially in terms of social, political, and even the religious dimension. Thank you again for your representation. Next speaker, Mrs. Kathy Allen, President and owner of the Connections Group. Please.
Yes, I'm very pleased to be with you. I'm Kathy Allen, and I am the person who has gone to all of your countries to train women to run for office. I had the pleasure of being in Kuwait 6 years ago and 5 years ago to be talking about stuff. And I got there and I was just very amazed at not only how smart the women were, your education, the education of girls, is particularly of interest to me, and how strong it is. In addition, I was impressed with the number of women in businesses and women-owned businesses, in addition to the number of women that you would see on TV handling the news. I was also impressed with how beautiful these women are and how much time they take to actually look good, how they speak and how they speak well. I have to say that I was nothing more than impressed. I have been horrified at the fact that you have no women in your parliament, and now 2, or soon to be 3, I hear, ministers. As it turns out, we have elected more women in the world in the last 5 years than we have the last 500 years. And everyone has done their part. 5 years ago, literally, we had the national average, as my friends from the IPU will say, that 5 years ago, we were, as a whole universe here, we've now gone up at least 7%. In really one generation, 20 years, we've gone up 20% in most of the countries. You know, now we have 3 countries with over 50%, including Rwanda, who's still at 60% women in their parliament. The UAE, for the first time, we have an Arab country with 50%. The important part is Cuba, right up there. The kinds of changes and increases, sometimes over 40% increase in the number of women, going from 0 to 40%, has happened in the last 20 years, one generation. It's huge. In the last 5 years, to go up 7% as a world average is astounding. In all of it, there are reasons that some of this has happened. 3/4 of those countries that have had any growth whatsoever have quotas. One of the very few that doesn't is the United States, and we crawl along, and we're now at 27% women. The biggest change that's happened in the last 5 years is the number of women in visible leadership, including ministers. In the United States, I was stunned when we hit the 50% mark. We're now at 46% women ministers. We've never had as many African American, as many Native American Indians as we now have. It is amazing. In all of that, it's a healthy progress that we see. Are there problems? Oh yeah. And if I take from Wiki the fact that it's such a true thing. One of my truest axioms of living now is don't worry about changing the world. Worry about changing one girl, one city, one legislature, that we spend so much time trying to build volume. Quantity, we should be absolutely focused on quality in terms of how we manage. With quotas being the best thing that really has helped infuse women. It's not a perfect science. And I agree with Vijitha that, we don't want to start with how this thing has progressed. The biggest problem with the women's movement internationally is that we don't talk to one another. Every time I arrive in a new country, and I have trained now in 58 countries, every time, by the way, everyone but 2 of the 23 Arab countries. What I can tell you is that quota is hardly the best of all processes to be able to move women into equality empowerment. Indeed, it is a clunky process. However, it works. It works. The problems start with we really don't have I would say it's not an easy transition. We need safeguards in it. We need to actually build quotas. Very similar. The best in the world is now in British Columbia, Canada, where if you are in Parliament and you are a white straight guy over 55, and you should decide you're not going to seek another office, a woman must take that position. The parties have to go ahead and include that woman in terms of whom they are putting up for office. In 10 years, they went from 16% women's representation, and without changing the total number of parliamentarians, they moved to 51%. It is absolutely a brilliant thing to look for. I advise that you check that out before you actually end up moving to a quota. With quota, you have to watch out that you don't put the women on that are the sons, the daughters, the relatives of the men already in power. That has been a similar complaint throughout the world. The next is you got to make sure that they get staffing. You know, in several different Arab countries, the women don't have staff. The men have 2, 3, and 4, but there are no staffing or funding for the women. The same thing is true in terms of running for office. The parties seldom allocate dollars for the women to get elected. You have to build these into the quota to stop the practices that make it so clunky, because it does work. And more than anything else, I have found the British Columbian one not only pulled together more women, they were women who automatically were people who had power. They had visibility in their parties long before they were elected. And they had the power to be able to say, no, you're not going to do that. As we saw in terms of what's going on right now is with all of the women that have had success, some of the best things that have happened are really at the local level. Those Rwandan women who, when they got in office and they had majority, decided to fire all the corrupt cops, and what they did instead is hired environmental engineers from all over the world to come and clean up their water. 4 in 5 kids died at birth before that. Now, 4.7 of 5 survive. That's one. In Africa, in the last 5 years, 32 countries in Africa have made it possible to own land as a woman. Not to automatically have to actually put your children in the hands only of a father if there is a divorce. And one of the best ones is in 3 of the actual Arab countries right now. We've started to see the beginnings of no more arranged marriages. And it's particularly for girls under 14 years of age. That happened through the judiciary in those countries. They've made huge progress. The most important progress that the United Nations and all of us know, when you start having more parity for women in the world, you have girls getting an education and they become part of an economic system. It really has become not only astounding in how this happens, it has changed the world in terms of women being able to have an economic base of delivery and also to be able to actually be part of the power structure. All part of a very good way of doing things. What I can say is that the problems we still have, and I go back to when I was training women in Kuwait, the problems you have is one greater than the rest of us. The rest of us, in terms of pulling things together, we have to get these things through government already. We have to add more seats for women. We have to change the way the elections are, The thing that is harder for Kuwait, it was my experience that women just weren't interested in running because they would say to me, Kathy, life is good. I'm raising my children. We have enough money. They have opportunities. We travel. Why would I go want to meet with a bunch of old white men? And honestly, that has happened in several countries as well, where women sit back and say, geez, do I really need all that grief and going to these meetings and having to learn the computer? How am I going to do that? Well, all of this becomes something that I'm so happy that in this incarnation that you have pulled together, that not only the Kuwaiti Women's Union, but also some of the other groups that are there. I think all of you are part of the next generation of doers. One thing I found that was a problem in all 58 countries I have worked. Women still are not voting for women in the numbers we need to actually effectuate a faster movement towards more women. And it happened in my own country. It took the Me Too movement before women actually said, you know, these other women are very much like me. We all share the same problems. I can't believe so many share the same problems. And from that was the first time that more women voted for women in our country. We had so many cases, in my country. Most guys vote for every woman that appears on the ballot who is running for a judicial seat. The judiciary is filled with, I would say, 40% right now in most states of the judiciary are women. Some of the most important decisions that keep people in I would say, a more democratic space really have been coming from the judiciary. They have stood up and actually been counted in this empowerment move. What I believe is that very much in terms of what Woodkey said, and actually I want to toast to Fatima too, because bless these women in Turkey that continue to persuade their government to make progress despite some of the other things that aren't so good in government there. The fact is, we always say, thank goodness for those women in actual Turkey right now. They are insisting on improving a segment of women's lives. At the same time, bigger problems are all over the globe. People are all working all over it. The fact is, I have great faith and read often about the work that women are doing. Their backbone is strong. And I think that in all of it, similar to when our last president was in office, what happened is that there were a lot of women's rights that actually were turned back. And so from that, we continue to pursue until we now have actually reached 28% women's representation and 50% of the ministers. Those are the two most visible things a group of women can do to be able to hurry the process. It's time. By the time the next parliamentary election rolls around, you must have that quota in place. You should build and write your own as close to the British Columbia model as you can, because it more quickly has facilitated more women having empowerment once they get in office. In some countries, Arabs especially, I have to say, when they are elected, it takes them 5 or 6 years to be able to actually have some authority there to change policies that affect their constituents. It is the right thing to do. In this, I have to say that no matter what, it's finding yourself 3 different, I would say, patience. You need patience every day now for these virtual meetings and the actual computer online world we live in, because these virtual meetings are the biggest hope amongst women. With virtual meetings, what can happen if they were in libraries, if they were accessible to women? The fact is, we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel of women's empowerment in every country that still is beneath 25%. The average worldwide is 25% of your parliament, and actually 13% of the ministers now. In many cases, what we need to do is do fewer things better. We don't have to do everything. As we saw in Turkey, what they've done in domestic violence appreciation is amazing. Also, what's important, don't worry about, the big picture all the time. It's at the local level where we can actually attain the most improvement. And also, get used to the technology. It is a step towards more of those, I would say, cleaning women and chauffeurs. They are the people that can actually move into power thanks to this obnoxious technology we call virtual meetings. However, they have their points. People in minority cultures are far more likely to be interested and involved. So I would say that's number one. Number two, quit worrying about everyone. Think instead of what is one thing that we can prove where women have actually accomplished much. And COVID is the example. I've now talked to 18 of those women who are leading countries. And the truth is, nobody actually questioned these women leaders at the top about reopening commerce when they first heard about the pandemic. They all said, nobody came to me crying about we have to close business. It was the difference between our children dying and whether or not you open the bank. And these women who have stood strong now are among the top 24 countries with the best actual records of fighting COVID and now the lowest rates of death. There was no second choice for these women, yet they could not be talked out of starting today and starting to do more drastic things than some of their other more, I would say, economically based male partners were. We work hard and we get there. The fact is we need to get there faster because the rate of what's happening worldwide is plummeting in things of the environment. A good note, when I came to, when I was in Kuwait last, I had said, well, what about the environment? Is anybody here running on more environmental progress? Oh, no, Kathy, that's an American thing. Oh, no, we don't talk about that. Well, now, the greatest number of women, new ministers, are in charge of the environment. Now we'll see what really happens when it comes to doing more. The best I can tell you, when more young people vote, young people being under 35, more women win. It's not that more women vote for women. It's that people under 35 vote for women. That is the greatest success in terms of moving quickly or quicker to more women at the table to make decisions. And finally, what I can say is I'm thrilled that you have taken this breath of fresh air and decided that now is the time to start this up again. No COVID can stop a determined woman from being at the table. That's what these women in charge have proved. So I say at 3 o'clock in the morning here in Seattle, Washington, I say, good to you. Oops, hold on. I toast to you and say to you, ladies and gentlemen, know that this is not the first time you will hear this, but Kuwait is on her way, and I couldn't be happier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for this passionate speech, and we highly appreciate that you stay up until this time, especially with the time difference between the States and Kuwait. We highly appreciate, in fact, your presence and participation and your positive spirit, in fact. And I was happy to hear your positive experience that you've been in Kuwait before. As a matter of fact, today, because you mentioned about the technicalities, I think there are more than one system. Sheikha Fadia, the head of the union, she was very keen to, try to reach out for bigger audience. That's why we face some of those technicalities, because she highly appreciates your presence, your participation. So this is the issue that we face, that there are more than one system at the panel now. So I would like to thank you again for your presentation. You mentioned a lot of, key issues, as a matter of fact. One of those issues when you said that you don't need to, worry about changing the world, but changing one, legislature or one rules, I think is more than enough. I totally agree with this approach, and we already used it in Kuwait, especially in terms of in issues of Kuwaiti women who are married to non-Kuwaitis, because their kids needs to be empowered, and also they are instead of demanding the full nationalities, because this is still a problematic issue. We really believe that breaks down the demands. It helps to reach a lot of issues, such as their education, residency, different issues. So I totally agree with you with this gradual approach in solving the issues. One of those issues also that you mentioned when you said about increasing the number of women is a healthy progress. This is exactly what I deeply believe, especially in this region. Having women is part of the culture of peace, emphasizing the culture of peace in this region. Because once our men get used to, respect the others and, working together and emphasizing the partnership between man and woman, I think it's a good approach for peace, for cultural peace in this region, for peaceful culture. Professor also, Mrs. Kathy mentioned about the quota. Also, she pointed out about the Canadian experience for women empowerment. I think all these ideas are very important. One last, remark when you mentioned about women voting for women. Maybe I disagree with this point, because we think this, at least this is my point. My opinion, my personal opinion. I think this will emphasize the society شلون نقول رقابة censorship. It's a society censorship for women will. So I think when we have women candidates, they need to present themselves as part of change. Once they do that and they succeed in making themselves and market their speech and their vision, the entire society, whether man and woman, will vote for them, as that happened in 2009 when 4 women were elected at that parliament. So I think those one of those issues that I believe women could do, but emphasizing the issue that women should vote for women. I deeply believe, because I'm talking from my field work in this region, it's pretty much problematic. Even when we talk to other women, they say, well, we are looking for change. We're looking for someone who could, present our demands, whether man and woman. So being part of change, I think that will help, and that will emphasize the popularity for those candidates. One last remarks, maybe I will share with you some of my own experience when you mentioned that women need to talk to women globally. Maybe when I personally faced some, challenges in my own career, I reached out to women networking and globally, and that's when we mentioned our program and our cooperation with WIPKI and Vegeta, and it was very helpful, and it helped me to move on, and I was able to move to advance my career, and so this is a very important platform for women globally to reach out and enhance women networking. Thank you again for your presentation, and I think we reached now to our last part of this panel, and we welcome any questions or comments by our audience. And Sheikh Fadia, take the lead now.
Haila, if you allow, I would like, hinting on what you just said and what Katie said before, sort of reach out with an offer or an invitation to all the participants in the call. Because we have the Global Leadership Academy and have wonderful members there, but within the Global Leadership Academy we also have started different initiatives. So one initiative we are participating in, which was not the idea of the Global Leadership Academy, is the Gender Alliance. The Gender Alliance is a global network of individuals who have different backgrounds, who come from different networks, some academic networks, some practitioners networks. And what unites them is the vision of a genderly equal society on a global level, on local levels, etc. So they do very different things, but from a gender perspective, they offer this network that Haila has just hinted to again, sort of that you have a network, you can find peers to empower you on a personal level, to share some ideas, some frustrations, and get empowered for the next step ahead. So what I will do is to mention in the chat just the link to the Gender Alliance. So whoever is interested, and it is open to men and women, so you don't have to be a woman to be part of the Gender Alliance. There are a lot of men in there as well, from all different national, ethnic, and religious backgrounds as well. So these topics, how is gender equality framed in my individual national setting as well, they can also be mentioned there, so it can also be shared there. I will mention that in the chat and warmly welcome everyone to join in. I also share my email with you, so if you have questions about that, you can also reach out. And Anna has just shared the program that Haila and Vijita are already hinting at, the Transforming Leadership, Women, Men, Power and Potential that we also started some years ago. So that is just a reflection or reaction and reflection on what was said so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
أخذ الوقت مع فرق الوقت يعني وسهروا معنا خاصة من أمريكا أستاذة كاثي كانت مداخلتها شيقة وسردها متميز، والكل أيضا يعني بخبرتهم في مجال العمل في المنظمات النفع العام والهيئات والدراسات اللي قدموها والأرقام، وأيضا من تركيا في عملها أيضا في يعني من أكبر الأحزاب اللي في تركيا والحزب الحاكم، وأيضا عملها في البرلمان. فصارت عندنا من كل الجهات نظرة شاملة يعني الأمور. ندري الآن احنا في وضع تحدي كبير يعني الآن ظروف الجائحة الدولية. من هذه التحديات إقامة مثل هذا المؤتمر دوليا، يمكن كلنا حسينا عدم السهولة كامل الاتصال، لكن الحمد لله يعني إن شاء الله يعني. لكن يبقى عندنا السؤال الكبير، احنا كدولة نعتبر نفسنا بالنسبة للمنطقة يعني التمثيل أو المرأة عندنا قد دعم كبير يعني تقدم كبير سواء في كل النواحي في الحياة. يبقى الأمل أكبر يعني، ولكن هذا أتى من كانت الكويت يمكن التاريخية كميناء ومجتمع منفتح وانفتاحية أيضا الدولة على هذا الأمر. لكن السؤال يبقى أن كمجتمع يعني دائما نحن نطلع إلى الأفضل والتقدم. في بعض الإخفاقات وفي بعض السنوات اللي ترتفع، لكن نطمح أن تكون هذه ممارسة طبيعية للمجتمع، وهذا لن يأتي إلا تعود المجتمع في وجود المرأة في مراكز اتخاذ القرار. طبعا يحتاج هذا الأمر إلى يعني بعض النساء ترى أن المرأة الكويتية أخذت مداها، وبعض النساء تطمح للأكبر، لكن هذه المسألة نسبية وتعتمد على الشخص وفي الحرية اللي نتمتع فيها هنا. اللي أنا كان ودي أسأله يعني الدولة أيضا يجب أن تكون داعمة لهذا الشيء. يعني المرأة لا تستطيع العمل بمفردها لأنها هي جزء من المجتمع، فالمجتمع ككل يجب أن يساهم في تنميته، وتنمية المرأة يعني دليل على تقدم المجتمع. أنا ودي أعرف منهم يعني في الدول اللي كلها الخبرات، يعني كل دولة على حدة، مدى التعاون بين المنظمات النسائية في المجتمع المدني عندهم وبين مؤسسات الدولة الرسمية. هل في هيئات سواء على مستوى الولايات أو المستوى الفدرالي تدعم هذه المنظمات الأهلية؟ وإذا كانت موجودة شنو شكلها؟ يعني ما هو الشكل التي تكون عليه، وما مدى مساهمة الدولة في التنمية المستدامة للمرأة؟
Not enough.
واضح السؤال؟
Not enough. But there is progress. There is progress, and I have to say I appreciate it in every. We, for example, in the United States, are not doing as much as Turkey's doing to protect women from domestic violence. The same thing is true in terms of many of the things that are going on right now in the United States, trying to recover from COVID. Over 10% minimum in every state. There's a 10% increase in the number of women who lost jobs. There's a 22% difference in terms of women of color who lost jobs during the COVID. There isn't a better building back happening here yet. Some of the best building back, Germany is doing a great job of a lot of that. So's New Zealand. Every place that actually started lockdown sooner is doing more because they have now less stress of daily rising deaths to be able to point to. I would say that there are many countries yet. Europe, terrible in many cases, except for 3 countries, because the people were just so slow at getting started and government wasn't doing enough. However, the countries where women were running them, they are experiencing right now programs where more women are getting trained to take those jobs.
I think it's, thank you very much, Kathy. I think my mother country here does a wonderful job. It's also different dimensions than in the US, obviously. I mean, they have less inhabitants and a very, very good infrastructure for the start.
Yeah.
And a pretty equal society also before. I mean, also if it comes to ethnic groups, etc., it's a different story, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think what is also where we all are in the same boat is, I think, the question of the hidden bias. So, as I said, if now there should be a scarcity of jobs, or if there is this sort of double stress when you have 3 kids in homeschooling, as we had now for the past 3 months, the question is, who is doing the homework? Who is supervising the children? My husband and me, we are both 100% working, him as a professor, me as a manager, also in home office. So are these couples, are these families then sharing all the other stuff as well, 50-50? Though we are a very modern couple, obviously. And or are there is there fallback to more traditional models also in these so advanced societies, or if there's less jobs on the market, is it again women becoming nurses and kindergartners, but not engineers anymore, because there are less engineering jobs or less pilots, because Lufthansa is now actually reducing as well on the job market. So I think that is where we all, again, hinting to you, Kathy, and also what Vijita said, the local and the global. I think that is where everyone in her family has to be aware of how do we shape this society? Are we shaping the society in the way that we want a society, and not say these and these policies have to change first, and then I can also do that? But also live by example. If you have kids or grandchildren or not, that doesn't really matter. It can also be an example for the neighbors. Just do it. Be part of that change, be part of that creation, which can be very hard, I think, because traditional models are the models that are accepted, and it's easy. Nobody is asking questions. That's just the usual thing. So I think it's that we will all be asked for the recover better, apart from the policies that we have to support. Yeah. So there's still a job to do also in Germany. That's what I wanted to hint at, Kathy. Thank you. And who knows who's after Miss Merkel? I think it's not going to be a woman. We see this fall.
Just, I wanted to sort of go back on that question about networks and women's agency, because if I go back to 2011, and I remember with Afghan women in the interim government in Brussels. This was with the G8, and I was representing the US government. And we had about 50 women from the diaspora also discuss a strategy for engagement. And that model we used as well during the Iraq crisis, women getting together, women in positions of power, and also women from the diaspora with a common agenda. But again, it was really driven by the G8. There wasn't that opportunity for it to be really driven. So I used to think that is an old model. But now, in response to the question and in response to my recommendation about some kind of framework that's created from Kuwait and then propagated also with others in the region, I think that's a way forward. Because even when we're talking about female ministers, the same female minister who was in Iraq, her portfolio was a dead portfolio. And so a few years ago, that portfolio does not exist. So it's nice to have also representational opportunities for women, but if they don't have the support that's needed, even at the ministerial level, it's not really going to be an effective position. It becomes purely a figurehead position. So I think that in this current state of COVID and with the realities that are global, I think those kinds of networks that are created that include business, that include government, that include women in the diaspora, and again, back to the Kuwait opportunity, that's an opportunity to kind of catalyze what are the real Kuwaiti interests and issues, and then open it up for others to engage. Otherwise, we lose the opportunity to have change start from ground up, where it should start. So that's my response. Thank you.
شخصيا أشكر مرة ثانية وجودكم معنا جميعا، دكتورة بكي، دكتورة بجيتا، دكتورة كاتي. وأعتقد الآن في عندنا كلمة من IPU مسجلة بنعرضها، وإن شاء الله اللقاءات قريبة.
Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to address you at this important event. Today's conference comes at a very peculiar moment. For the past year, the world has been experiencing an unprecedented crisis that goes well beyond a health pandemic. COVID-19 will have lasting social and economic consequences. It has revealed the strengths and the weaknesses of our societies. And these strengths and weaknesses have a strong gender dimension. Women are the strength of the COVID-19 response by providing essential services, especially in the health and social sectors. They are also the ones maintaining the social fabric in our disrupted societies. So their role has never been more important. But the crisis has also revealed our weaknesses. Women are the ones mostly hit by the crisis because of pre-existing gender inequalities that grew further. The gender gap in access to education, employment, and technology is widening. Women and girls suffer from even higher rates of gender-based violence than before the pandemic. You will agree with me to say that we can't afford to let COVID-19 take us backwards, when on the contrary, we need to accelerate progress to fulfill women's rights and empower women and girls. As we aim to build back better, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development remains more valid than ever. And not only is gender equality a standalone goal under SDG 5, it is also an enabler for the entire development agenda. The Interparliamentary Union has been monitoring two particular targets of the SDGs. Under SDG 5, we monitor target 5.5 on ensuring women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making. Under SDG 16, we monitor target 16.7 on ensuring responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels. Indeed, gender equal and inclusive decision-making is essential for development, for human rights, for peace, and for democracy. Post-COVID-19, parliaments will have an even more vital role to play in developing laws, policies, and budgets to advance gender equality and actualize the SDGs. For that, we need women's voices to be equally heard at the decision-making table, not only because it's good for women, but because it's good for society. To enable all of this, we need gender parity in political decision-making. In 2016, IPU's member parliaments adopted a resolution committing to develop a roadmap with timelines for achieving gender parity. And just last week, the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women also agreed that gender parity should be the objective to be pursued. Yet we have a long way to go. In 2015, women accounted for 22.1% of members of parliament worldwide. By now, the percentage has reached 25.5%. While we are moving in the right direction, at this pace, it would take us about a half century to reach gender parity. Now, how do we accelerate progress? One of the lessons we have learned at the IPU is that a crisis can lead to a great leap forward, provided that there is political will. Gender parity quotas exist in a wide range of countries, from Belgium to Mexico, from Senegal to Spain. Even in the COVID-19 context, some countries have succeeded in accelerating the adoption of gender parity quotas. This was the case in 2020 in two countries in Latin America, which are among the hardest hit by the pandemic, Peru and Colombia. Also, over the past decade, we have seen gender quotas being introduced in the MENA region, especially following the Arab Spring. It is one of the regions that have progressed the most in recent years, moving from 9.5% women MPs in 2010 to over 16% in 2015, and reaching nearly 18% right now. Everywhere, regardless of the political system and context, quotas have been a key determinant of progress. In 2020, out of 57 countries that held parliamentary elections, 25 applied legislated gender quotas. In these countries, women gained an extra 12 percentage points of seats in lower and single houses. This is enormous. But for them to work, quotas need to be well designed and adapted to a given political system. They must be mandatory and properly enforced. And most importantly, they must set ambitious targets. We know that there are limitations and barriers everywhere, We also know that quotas also face counter arguments and barriers, but today we need to be solution-oriented. We need to challenge ourselves to put in place strategies and systems that can lead to a concrete change in raising the numbers of women in political office. To succeed, we also need to build a favorable environment in society. The status of women must be enhanced so that the role of women in decision-making can be made possible. This implies ensuring equality in the law and in society through education and sensitization of girls and boys from an early age. It also means that women's groups from civil society should be provided a space to voice their concerns. Also, we need to foster a favorable political environment. Political parties need to be sensitized to recruit and give prominent positions to women, and they must be able to develop their own gender strategies. Access to resources for political campaigning is another important issue. Finally, the political space must be free from gender discrimination, stereotypes, and violence. IPU studies show that over 80% of women parliamentarians have faced some form of intimidation or harassment during their mandate. So we need to tackle all these issues in order to level the playing field for women and men in political life. Beyond the numbers, we need institutions that are able to advance gender equality and craft policies, laws, and budgets that are gender responsive. For if we empower women in society, we will pave the way to gender parity in politics and vice versa. To conclude, I want to assure the Kuwaiti people and the Kuwaiti parliament that the IPU stands ready to support them towards achieving this dual objective of gender parity and gender sensitivity in all decision-making processes. This would be an immense leap forward towards achieving all SDGs by 2030. I thank you for your attention and wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
وعلى وقتهم ومساهمتهم الثرية، وإن شاء الله يتمكنون أيضا من متابعة جلسة بكرة العربية والكويتية، ونكون إن شاء الله يعني قد قدمنا ما يفيد بالنسبة لتقدم وتمكين المرأة ومشروع الوصول إن شاء الله لحلول قادرة للتطبيق إن شاء الله.